Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I'm Ella, Jeff's assistant. Thank you so much for joining us this week. It's awesome to have you join us. So we've got some stuff to go into. There's a new moon happening on Monday, the 13th, and Jeff says it's a very interesting new moon. So he's going to go into that. And then our topic for this week is, have we forgotten who we are? Meaning where we come from, our connection with the source. It's a big, big question. And I try to stay tapped into it every single day. It's very challenging, very difficult. Let's get started, Jeff.
Right. Thanks for that. Yeah. So, we'll kind of start with current energies right now. Definitely we get a new moon coming in on Monday, and we get a new moon every month, and it's free. It comes free every month. So the bottom line is this new moon's really kind of potentially intense. And I think we get a few intense things going on in the world right now, a lot of tension from a lot of areas. So the new moon happens right at about 1:28 a.m. in the morning on Monday. So it's really technically for most people late Sunday night. And why this moon is intense is we've had the sun and Mars going to a conjunction, which is actually going to happen right about the 17th of November. Now, Sun and Mars, because if you study the speed of Mars, it's kind of like cars going down a freeway. Mars is just a little bit slower than the Sun. Sun moves just approximately 1 degree per day. And Mars is usually somewhere around 38 to 43 minutes per day in terms of longitudinal progression. So it takes time for Mars to catch the Sun. And when it does, they are pretty intense. It brings a lot of, you could say heightened emotion. It could also bring anger. Tempers flare a little bit more. And it also is energizing. So it has positive attributes to it too, except the new moon on Monday is going to join the sun, right? Because that's what a new moon is. The moon lines up with the sun from Earth's perspective. Then right after that, because the sun and Mars are so close together, the moon's going to hit literally hours later. In fact, I think the new moon is on Pacific time just about 1:30 a.m., 1:27 to 1:30 a.m. And you have the moon will go past the sun and quickly, because the moon is much, much faster than the sun. It moves literally 1 degree every couple of hours on average. And it's going to hit Mars right after the new moon. Well, the ancients always said, you look at the new moon and you look at the first aspect, meaning geometry wise, what does the moon hit right after that? Well, it's going to hit Mars. And then right on its tail, the sun comes in and hits Mars as well. So remember, the sun is the seed where time and space get created, and the moon is the containment vessel of spirit, or where spirit gets concretized. Very similar to the womb in an animal or a human being, or the soil, which takes the seed, nurtures it, contains it, and then gives it growth. So every new moon is you can think of it that way. That's why moons were such a big deal to the ancients. They would look at new moons and full moons because they are kind of a seed planting time every month. So this one could be a little bit intense. And let's hope the things in the Middle East don't get more intense, or for that matter, other things we've been talking about, which is the growing tensions that are going on kind of all over the world in many ways. And again, we have so much political stuff going on right now. We've got clearly more and more tensions are mounting here in the political scenes with all the candidates. We've got also more stuff coming out on Biden, and we have more tensions going on in general with the economy and the border and all these other things. And remember, the big picture was we were talking about Saturn is over the United States moon, and that's very intense. And that's going on well into the latter part of this month. But the most thing we have is we've got Mars by primary direction crossing the United States moon right at the end of November. And we've also got the eclipse points moving out of the signs that they're in the sidereal zodiac, which again is the cardinal points. The cardinal points are again where the equinoxes and solstice points begin. And we have in the sidereal zodiac, Rahu leaving the fire trine of Aries and going backwards into the water trines of Pisces. And you've also got the opposite going on with Ketu. It's moving backwards from from Libra into its previous sign there, which is, of course, Virgo. So powerful stuff. This is known as Gandanta. It often brings explosive or intense events because you're changing from unlike elements, from fire to water. See, very, very powerful. So, and that's, of course, the North Node. So let's hope, keep our fingers crossed here, like we've been saying in podcasts. It's better to be aware than get blindsided, right? So that's kind of where all that is lying in terms of general energies. There's a lot more bigger things going on. Again, the United States is coming into its Pluto return. We've also got a Neptune opposition Neptune, more subterfuge, more confusion, and more things where deception becomes a real part from people in positions of power. So, but the global world is going to feel those nodes shift gears. And let's hope things in the Middle East and all the situation with Israel doesn't escalate. But it sure looks like, from the threats of everything we're hearing, it sure sounds like it could. Let's hope not.
Well, let's definitely hope not. You know, you're talking about Neptune, and I feel like we don't talk about Neptune enough because it's kind of like one of those planets that it's like when we talk about Pluto, and a lot of people said, oh, who cares about Pluto, right? I feel like Neptune has that reputation a little bit, but the power of Neptune is so great. I mean, it truly is. It makes you feel like you're in the twilight zone.
Neptune is a really mysterious planet. And when you look at astronomy, you know, the astronomers really hate astrology. I know I've been around a lot of astronomers. Some of them are very kind and they're good. But for the most part, left brain hard sciences has almost completely dismissed astrology as wacko-ness, right? In fact, I did the same thing until I really started studying it. You know, back in the 70s and early 80s, I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. But the more I delved into it, the more I saw that it truly was the science of astronomy applied to actions on Earth. And I don't think there's any place you can see that more accurately than in traditional or classical astrology. And for anybody who's interested, that is a term that's been kind of coined since the mid 80s and maybe early 90s. That means the return back to ancient astrology as it was practiced in Greece, Chaldea, Egypt, and the Middle Ages, all the way up until the Age of Reason, which is pretty much when Darwinianism and all the Age of Reason and hard sciences moved in, which was the late 1600s, early 1700s. So that, and of course, Vedic astrology, which is also known as Jyotish, which brings us to the topic tonight. And it also relates a little bit to Neptune, because I want to finish answering about Neptune. I'm going to share the screen here. I use these diagrams quite a bit, but I really enjoy I think the clarity that they give. You can actually see something right here. Modern psychology, again, likes to tell us we have a conscious mind, which is our world down here where I'm circling, and a so-called subconscious mind. And even though that might be a little bit of a last century model, it still really holds water. This big thick dashed line is kind of the division between what psychology or psychiatry might refer to as the blockage between the small percentage of our conscious mind that we're purported to use versus this huge, vast capability that the human brain is believed to have. Also, the so-called subconscious mind. So notice what you just mentioned, Ella, here is Neptune. Neptune is the crescent of the moon bent over the cross. It's bent upwards. And it's kind of a portal, if you will, between the so-called subconscious mind and lower conscious mind, known as, you could say, our perception of reality, or as the Aramaic and Hebrew terms called it, the nephesh. And there's many terms that are in Sanskrit that use the same kind of analogies, conscious, subconscious, or higher self. So Neptune, if you look at the astronomy, and I started mentioning this earlier, many astronomers laugh at astrology. But it's really interesting if you look at the astronomical ways that planets behave, and also a lot of the elements of how they are. Like take, for instance, Neptune. It's heavily shrouded in gas. It's one of the gas giants, and they actually say it's very mysterious. Probes and everything else can't seem to penetrate it. It's a really mysterious, misty planet, and not that some of the other ones aren't as well, but it's really an enigma. Neptune, just like Pluto is a small dwarf, but yet very, very powerful at the very outer edge of the planet. And of course, Uranus is a very, you could say, eclectic and strange, unusual, liberating type energy. And look at Uranus, it orbits 180 degrees on its side. So there's a lot of really kind of interesting analogies between astronomy and astrology when you just look at the general behaviors of these planets in some ways. Mercury, the messenger, it's extremely fast, goes around the Earth or the sun many, many times a year, like 3 times a year. So it's quite quickly, in terms of its orbit. So Neptune always, I always do in readings, I'm always looking at Neptune making hard aspects to a person's chart. Like my son, about a year and a half ago, he had Neptune conjuncting his sun. Now, for anybody listening, that means Neptune aligned with his birth chart sun. Many people will never live to see that happen. Why? It takes Neptune 180 years to go around the solar system. That's a long, long, long time. So what's interesting about all this is that Neptune can only make certain aspects in a person's life. And it often is associated with strange, either happenings like I find in health. Many people say, the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. When my son had Neptune conjuncting his sun, he said, I think I'm in the twilight zone. Because it's just everything's so confusing and so strange. And I said, well, you've got Neptune conjuncting the sun. Neptune conjunct Mars is really a strange energy. Talk about the twilight zone. I had a client who I just spoke to 2 days ago. He thanked me profusely for letting him know. And this is a guy in his 60s. He said, thank you so much for letting me know that these energies were coming in. And when Neptune conjuncted his Mars, which it's now stationing, that means it's standing over his Mars over the next few months until January. He said, if I didn't know this, he said, I'd think I was going out of my mind. He said, I've never felt anything like this in my life. I said, you never will again, unless you live to be another 180 years old. You see? So Neptune, all these planets are so powerful on this lower psyche or the lower, perception of reality, which is our conscious mind. They're really powerful, and belief's not required. And he's going to naturopathic doctors right now, and they're saying your blood, is doing all kinds of strange, odd things, and he's cleansing on parasites. And, again, this is the nature of Neptune making hard aspects in your chart. By the way, when it makes good aspects, it can be dreamy. It's almost like, a fantasy land. When you get Neptune trining Venus, this is when people have these romantic, just storybook affairs, or they have storybook, lives or events happening in their lives. Also artistic creativity. I've seen people in music and film or creative art, painting, etc. They find their lives really blossom when Neptune, the planet of intuitive, connection, makes positive aspects to your charts. Quite profound. All these planets are quite profound, and belief is not required.
Is not required. Well, doesn't Neptune also represent spirituality?
Absolutely. It's the portal to the so-called upper realms of the spirit and the soul. If you look at that diagram, let me put that up one more time. So if you look at this diagram, you can actually see Neptune is like halfway above the so-called upper portions. See the neshama, which is a strange word that simply means it is, I think, the karmic portal, which is what Saturn is actually the connection to all our karmic, you could say, constituent parts of the soul. And the so-called wisdom of the soul, which is also sometimes represented by Uranus, is all of this is now bleeding down quite possibly through the portal we call Neptune. So it's really profound stuff. So this diagram, it's a little bit cleaner because it doesn't have the drawings of Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto in here. But you can see there's something called Dath in the tree of life. That's a strange word that means the secret elements of the connection between intuition and logic. So yes, that's why Neptune often brings a disassociation with this world and spirituality and artistic creativity, but it also brings psychic sensitivity. And I always tell people, be very careful if you have hard aspects. Drinking, substance abuse, medications, even foods can have drastically stronger effects on you than they normally would, because Neptune tends to sensitize the psychic levels of the body, which is also known as the outer layers of the auric field. See, we have layers. They actually say there's 5 layers to the soul, but the major 3, first we have the physical body, which is what we're all in touch with so much. Then you have the etheric double, which is kind of known as the layer where all of the planetary energies are believed to transmit through. Then you have what they call the psychic double, and then you have the noetic double. Now, those are kind of names that were actually used by many spiritualists, and also the Magus of Strovolos kind of called them that too. So we have layers. They say there's outer layers past that as well. So it's really fascinating to look at it from this viewpoint, because it really allows us to think about us in much different ways than just the physical world.
Yeah, well, that definitely connects to this evening's topic, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's a deep one. And, it's kind of a thematic topic that we've hit on from many different angles and viewpoints in these podcasts. And it's one that, we both love, because really, we're spanked on the rear end in the delivery room, and we're told, grow up, become smart, get a good job, be good, and all of which is good. These are really good things. But we're never really taught that, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. The religions have touched on this a bit, but overall, it's not a commonly educated theme in society, and we all go through life, and we age and we grow older, and we start to see that, our friends, our loved ones, pets pass away, and that's where time tends to stop. That's really the only time we often stop and really get jolted by, wow, what we're living is not continuous. All of us go from birth to growth to maturity to kind of a peak, and then we atrophy and we're going to pass away. And all of us do this at different times. And what's interesting about this world and astrology, I'm always fascinated, and I've always kind of rebelled against modern normal astrology. They all run around and say, you are your astrologer. You're a Libra, you're a Scorpio, you're a Taurus, or whatever sun sign you are. Nothing can be further from the truth. In fact, the more in my researches that I look at this stuff, especially some of the sacred ancient documents, we are absolutely not our astrology. I think the astrology might be us, and it might be just the experience that we are having in this kind of sojourn. We're almost like the movie Avatar. The soul laid down to go to sleep and then got stuffed down into this world. I had a couple of just wonderful readings here just recently. One in Nadi astrology, I was saying to a client, I said, wow, I said, you had some siblings here that just went through tremendous challenges, and especially this brother. And how could I see that? Well, Mars and the Lord of the Third is often a brother, you see, or Mercury. And in this case, it was Mars and the yogas to it. And it was fascinating. She said, oh my God, she says, you wouldn't believe it. Yeah, my brother told me a story that he didn't want to come to Earth. And he was standing outside of the universes, and the angel said, no, you have to go. And the person or the individual was shoved into like a black hole, like a vortex, and then ended up being born. And it's very interesting, these stories. And I'm always fascinated to hear stories from people. And I love the comments people give to us on this podcast, because people have had some amazing experiences. And many of us are more advanced souls, or at least more in touch with the upper portions of these realms that are kind of laughed at in modern society. And like I had an individual reading today. It was amazing. This person was told by the person's mother was told, your child's going to be born stillborn. So, and the reason why, many people may have heard of this, the child came out of the placenta, and this was somewhere in the duration of the pregnancy. I forget exactly where, but it was somewhere, I think somewhere in the middle. So the medical profession, said, you're probably going to have a stillborn baby here. And what's interesting is she was born stillborn. And then within 3 or 4 minutes thereabouts, after being born, the child starts breathing, and the doctors freaked out. They're like, oh my God, this child's alive. So they cut the umbilical cord, and I had to do a rectification. And just so people know what a rectification is if you don't know your exact birth time, you can I read the energy and find out. And then I also ask a bunch of questions, which allows me to see if many of the timing and location astrology lines up with the current birth chart, especially the angel on the eastern horizon. With this particular individual, very fascinating lady. I never disclose clients, but I'll just say this, that really a unique individual. And we could see so many fascinating past life stuff. And some of the events that had happened in the life were quite profound, and they were really shown by this person's birth chart. And many people listening will be familiar with terms like walk-ins, or they feel at some point in their life has really changed. And this is shown by progressions and transits throughout the life. I know I've experienced that myself. I had, for the first time in my life, primary directed moon cross the ascendant. See, and in your birth chart, if you have certain, you could say, planetary progressions or directions cross certain angles, which is, again, sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight in your chart, which is known as the angles. Absolutely profound. These are once in a lifetime aspects, especially primary and solar arc directions. And we've mentioned this, even in the United States, we're saying there's some unprecedented, once in a 360 year period that these happen. And when they happen on an individual, I find they often find experiences where it's life changing. Well, this is actually mentioned in one of the texts we talked about many podcasts ago on the soul, which is called the Share Hagilgam, which brings us full circle, remembering who we are. We are not the astrology. And again, I'm going to return to one of my favorite diagrams, because this diagram really shows it. This diagram, again, I've used many times, but I love this diagram because I think it's pretty accurate to what goes on in the creation and sojourn of our souls. And again, no matter what your concept of God is, it's above all creation. And our souls are created right about here. This word absolute is a word that means it's where the divine emanation of souls are created. And notice something here too, we haven't pointed out before. Each little world has a tree of life within it, all the way down. You see, so there's no astrology up here, at least not as we would know it. Very fascinating and very divine stuff. And again, 49 dimensions, 49 subdimensions. The next world's down, Braya, again, 49 dimensions, 49 subdimensions. Well, there's a theory that many of the bays of souls might be right about in this area, right in here. When I say the Bay of Souls, people may have heard of that. That's been referred to in movies and in ancient sacred texts, where the soul's park may be outside of what we call the Yetziratic world. Remember, Yetzira stands for a word. It's a word that means formation. And what that means truly is this is where the atomic and subatomic worlds start becoming dense and solidifying. It's where creation melds into formation. It's also where time and space of many different dimensions is highly probable to be happening. We all think of time as, a minute and a second, a year and a month and all that stuff, like the new moon and the year and all that and the seasons, but that's Earth-based time. When we talk about stuff like this, we're talking way out there here. If there are 49 parallel universes, and let alone the universe we are in, we don't even fully understand. I can tell you, we're just discovering new galaxies and new things and black holes and so on and so forth that are out there. It's exceedingly complex. So when you look at time and space, if you lived on a different planet, you would have completely different astronomical time periods based on its time around its sun or its lunations if it has moons. I mean, you're talking infinite possibilities here, just let alone in our galaxy. So, or in our universe. So this is deep, deep stuff. And what it says here is that our souls might reside somewhere out here after periods of incarnation. Other people say they might reside here in the astral planes. So it depends on the level of the soul. And this is really deep stuff. The Sharia Gilgam gets into this, where, again, this depends on, after certain amounts of incarnations, what they call the nefesh, the ruach, which is also the spirit, and the neshama start joining after so many incarnations. And it's very interesting stuff because you can actually have other souls join you during these incarnations in our bodies. So it's really deep stuff. And that book gets into a lot of that. And many of the practitioners in psychology, regression therapy, past life regression therapy, and some of the psychiatrists I know have really delved into this stuff and found it to be true. There's somebody else residing in our auric field besides just us. It's a parasitic almost kind of energy. And sometimes they're divine. Some people have divine souls join them to guide them at certain points in their journey. Other times we have evil ones join. In fact, this is where the law of attraction really applies. You become like a magnet to what you believe and what you think about. This is truly the law of attraction. You start resonating like a tuning fork. This is why criminals tend to hang with criminals. This is why drug people tend to hang with drug people. Their resonances are very like, and they're attracting disincarnate elementals just like that. So when we forget who we are, we realize that a lot of us are like Q-tips in a mud puddle. And if we don't keep what we are in clean, we can start attracting things. Now, this is valuable stuff that the religions were right about. And this gets really into some pretty deep, deep stuff about cleansing the aura. One of the things that sadly is never taught anymore, and I was really blessed to learn some of this stuff, is clearing techniques and protection techniques. And believe it or not, the Psalms, which were smacked in the middle of the Bible, also known as Tehillim, are exceedingly powerful. Psalm 91 is revered in almost any of the Western religions, but boy, its rabbit hole goes quite deep on how powerful it is. And you can't get that out of just the English version. Not that the English version isn't wonderful. I'm not demeaning it at all. But what I am saying is if you could go back and look at ancient texts like the Shemush Tehillim, you would see that each of these verses have codes and cryptology encrypted within them. And see, this is a sad thing because we've lost who we are. When you go back through time, there's evidence that maybe somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 BC, we might have entered into an era of darkness, a yuga. It's a division of Kali Yuga. There's many different opinions on this. But clearly, we look back at times of Hermes Trismegistus and Rosicrucianism and some of the ancient rabbis and Kabbalists and yogis and Tibetan lamas, the Mayans, the Hunas in Hawaii were stunning. They could heal people. They could manipulate matter. This is all stuff that nobody believes unless they can put it on a scale and measure it, right? In hard sciences. But this is stuff that we're all capable of. And that's who we are. We're, I think, really powerful individual beings. And the problem is the lower conscious mind can only attract what it believes. This is why more advanced souls, they seek this stuff out and they learn it and they become powerful because they can't be swayed and mind controlled, and they start learning the powers of focus. And then that way, the white noise of the world, and many spiritual practitioners will tell you, be in the now, be in the this, be in the that, but also you want to be in the focus of your own centered self. And there's certain wonderful techniques that actually use the archangels and use sacred geometry to push and vanish things out that you can protect your aura and put them around you. I want to show you something that's really cool that many people who've heard of Leonardo da Vinci didn't know. I'm going to show you this. Here's something that is interesting. Now, many people said, oh, the pentagram's the work of the devil, right? Well, the inverted pentagram is, but actually, believe it or not, the ancient pentagrammation is what it was called, is exceedingly divine and exceedingly proves divinity and God. Well, watch this here. You can see this is Leonardo da Vinci's diagram of the human figure within the pentagrammation. And you can see this is also from Levy's Transcendental Magic right here, this same figure over here. And notice you see the glyph of Mercury in here over Venus, see? And that's that's actually over Pluto. Very interesting stuff. And you see Mars, see all the zodiacal figures and many different things. So a great technique is to have and realize that at your left side, that's called Earth. And you can actually see the color here is dark. See? Notice spirit is above your head. That's white. And then fire is the red over here at the right side. And then this is air, which is, of course, yellow. And this here is water, which is blue. Well, how about that? That's also the four archangels. Archangel Michael rules fire. Archangel Gabriel rules water. Archangel Raphael rules air, the sylphs and the fairies. And Archangel Uriel rules the earth spirits. And of course, spirit is above the four elements of matter. Hence, many people have heard of the five elements, which is spirit over matter. So this is really powerful stuff. And I think it helps center people too. There's many ways of looking at this stuff. And again, these are the original diagrams. And of course, I overlaid on that. Very interesting stuff. And here it is laid out again. You can see with where it actually shows the essence of spirit over matter. And here's the elements you could see actually shown in the symbolism. Here's another example that's a really wonderful thing to imagine in terms of protection. Notice here, you could see this is the human aura right here. And if you take the head, this looks very analogous to a human being. This is God's name of fire in the Aramaic and Hebrew. This is He, which is, again, the next element down, which is water. This is Vav, which is air, and this is earth, which is He. And notice the analogy. This is the head, the shoulders and the arm, the torso, and this down here is the hips and the legs. And this is actually something very protective for people to imagine over them. It's very sacred. These are the four letters of God's name in the ancient Aramaic and Hebrew. Very, very powerful stuff and cool to be aware of. By the way, this is something else I love to bring up. This is a little bit different thing to look at. These are the ancient hunas of Hawaii. This is a diagram. There's a book you can get called The Secret Science of Miracles by Max Heindel. Wonderful, where it talks about the physical body is mirrored by the etheric double. And you can see all these symbolisms here. And this is a lot of interesting stuff about the mechanics of telepathy and prayer. And this also has a lot to do with many Reiki practitioners will have heard of this. It's quite interesting stuff where this double is the one we're all going to go back into at some point in what we call time when we exit the body. Believe it or not, we go into it every single night. Most of us don't remember. This is why our dreams come at us all the time. And dreams usually are us kerbumping into our own elementals or kerbumping into elementals that we have created. And some people have learned to really develop. This is an element that has been talked about by in the Magus of Strovolos and many other practitioners. You can actually create through concentration an etheric double that is outside of the one you were God-given. And you can pour your consciousness into it and actually go places and effectuate change. There's many people who do this and help people. They've actually saved animals and people. There's a lot of lore about this stuff, and no one believes it until they actually experience it. But you can actually learn to strengthen your conscious mind. There's a great book that gets you a little bit into this, and that is the book called Esoteric Practices by the Magus of Strovolos on stoaseries.com. I'll put that on the screen. That's a good book. And also, Ledbetter and many others have given talks about this stuff in the ancient past. This was taught in the mystery schools where we have really forgotten who we are. And I think this is more germane in modern society than at any time before. Most of us are busy staring at iPhones, at screens, or locked up in life, driving, taking care of bills, under the stress of so many things that modern society lays upon us. Yes, we have many more conveniences today, but we're also inundated with psychic attack. We've got 5G around us. We've got stuff in our foods, our water, and the air, chemtrails, all this stuff. Life is really psychically dense right now. And I think this is a wonderful time to just research this type of stuff so we become more centered. We step out of all the white noise and the fear and the worry and the bills and the this and that. Not that we should turn our backs on our physical lives and responsibilities, but people go insane. Most of the drug abuse, drug addiction, alcoholism is to escape from the realities that we're in. Not good. And they often create 10 times the problems that we would have faced had we just dealt with the problem or sweated it out. Wouldn't you agree, Ella?
Totally. And all of these things, all of the daily minutia also, it's almost like it's designed to prevent us from connecting to the source. It really takes a lot of focus and a lot of energy. You have to want to do it too. You have to want, the desire has to be there. That's why you can see in certain charts that people are on a spiritual journey here. Totally, that's what they're doing here. That's their experience that they're going to have here. The desire is truly, truly there. Like you look at someone like Krishnamurti. Some say, oh, they turned him into this great spiritual leader.
No, he karmically had that going on. You can actually see that. In fact, they knew when certain spiritual people would be born by the yogas in the chart.
Right. It's in the chart. That's what I'm saying. Yes, it's there. It's already there. But we can all connect, make that connection as long as we're conscious of it and we're aware of it. These should be talks that everyone is having, don't you think? Like constantly, because
I think it helps a lot.
This is
everyone's living their perception of reality. And it's so interesting because I think back in my life, and I think anybody can think back through their lives, and it's kind of astounding when we look back and page through the memories of our mind, the different scenarios and situations we've been in, how starkly different and real those all were. I mean, when you look at the experience of life, they say when we exit the body, the first thing that happens is recall. And we talked about this a long time ago. It was highly recommended by many spiritual practitioners not to get embalmed. Why? The first thing they do is crank you full of all this formaldehyde. And it really disrupts. And people say, well, how could that be? Because you're attached by silver cord to the body. So if a person is not embalmed right away, at least for 3 to 7 days, really helps on all the recall. And they say we're outside of our body, and this recall keeps coming back, all the things that we cannot remember. And that is so valuable to the soul into raising consciousness. And here's an interesting thing. There's a technique called remedial measures in Vedic astrology. It's the same technique in the ancient Aramaic and Hebrew, and that is called teshuvah. And that is actually a method to where you're much smarter. Instead of waiting to die, start doing it every night before you go to bed. Do recall. Look at things. It's good for us to be aware of what's going on in our lives and our past lives. So, and a lot of times we can't remember past lives, but if we get in touch with just the recall in this life, it's really, really important for us. It makes a huge, huge difference. And it's much better to do it now than when you're standing outside of your body. And they say the more you try and do that, the more you'll actually raise the vibration of consciousness. Even stuff that's painful, like we've all had parents or friends or situations, relationships that are really painful. And if you can just let it go, not that you have to agree with anything anybody did to you, but you just decouple psychically from that, it detaches the psychic lines of tension to your auric field. There's a prayer that I found and actually was given many, many years ago. It's stunning. It has 7 elements to it. And it basically tells you that you want to light a candle, stare at the base of the flame where it's blue, where it connects to the base of the flame. And you want to make a declaration that anything anybody's ever done to you in this incarnation or all incarnations, you want to let it be blessed, or you want to decouple from it. Doesn't mean you got to agree with anything. It just means you want to release it. Bless them, release it on all time, all space, and all dimensions. Now that's an interesting declaration to be making, you see, because you're basically saying you want to wipe it clean on all time, all space, and all dimensions and incarnations. And you want to add incarnations. I forgot to say that. So, and then the next thing is you want to make the same declaration to anyone connected to your soul roots. Now, that doesn't just mean mom and dad, though it does, but it means your ancestors connected to your soul root. And that also includes anyone in any relationships that you've had. This could be friends, people you got in fights with, people you had love affairs with, whatever. All of this, you want to decouple anything on all time, space, dimensions, and incarnations that anyone has done that's detrimental or that you might have done. And there's actually a phrase in there that says inadvertently. And what that means is many people have been forced to join the military, especially in ancient times. They'd hang you if you did. Like Dr. Zhivago is one recent example. If you didn't join the military, they'd shoot you for treason. It's still that way in certain countries. And just like the draft. If the draft is re-implemented, you don't go, they'll put you in jail. So a lot of people end up having to do things that they don't desire to do, but they had to do it through a course of duty, so on and so forth. So, and this happens in many sectors of life. When you think about law enforcement, you think about all kinds of things. This could happen to many people, bosses who have to do certain things that they don't want to do, but they got to do it because they're a company, right? Make that money. So we're all swept in the path of karma, dharma, and also purposes. And what's interesting is when we stop and we look back, when we're at the end of the tunnel, about ready to dive off into a new thing. And I always love to mention, I'm going to play my favorite little cartoon.
Well, even for the brave Superman, I gotta do it. Tristle, trestle, trestle, throne. Time for this one to come home.
Gee, Mr. Wizard, looks like I made a mess out of things again.
Always I tell you, Tudor, be just what you is, not what you is not. Folks what you is has the happiest lot.
It's like that, where literally we end up as avatars playing a role and then we leave. So we got to remember who we are. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience.
And never forget it, right? Never forget it. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much for this. Really, really interesting, fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you all very much for watching, listening, for your comments. We appreciate them so much. Take good care of yourselves. Have a great week. And we'll see you next time on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.